Last night, India lost one of its biggest icons, an industry legend. Ratan Tata, the chairman emeritus of Tata Sons, who led a modest, unassuming life, was laid to rest with state honours in Mumbai today. It was in the presence of not just his loved ones, but millions of people in the city that he grew up in the city that he loved, in the city that he called home. Mr. Ratan Tata will be remembered for his contribution to Indian industry, for putting Indian industry on the global stage at a time when no industrialist at that day and age, back in the 80s and 90s, had the ambition, the vision or the drive that Indian companies could and will take on the global stage, will take on multinational status. Ratan Tata would say that he wanted to be remembered as someone who worked for the very best interests of both business and society, that he wanted to be remembered simply as someone who made a change which he thought was small, but frankly, his legacy, that change is so enormous and so monumental, it will live on not just in the hearts and minds of people whose lives he touched, but also millions of people across the world. Those words ring true today as India bid farewell to truly a crown Ratan of the country.
Iconic industrialist, one of the most respected businessmen of India, the gentleman billionaire, visionary, and the biggest brand ambassador of India Inc. Ratan Naval Tata was born to Parsi parents Naval and Sunu Tata in Bombay in 1937 during the British Raj. Ratan was raised by an indulgent yet disciplinarian grandmother, Navajbai, along with younger brother Jimmy and half-brother Noel after their parents separated. Life was luxurious for the young Tatas, but their grandmother instilled a strong set of values in them. Young Ratan played a lot of cricket and learned the piano while leading a protected and privileged life. Ratan Tata studied in Bombay's well-known schools Campion and Cathedral and John Cannon. He would say later he was shy, fearful of public speaking, and was not into too many extracurricular activities. After school, Ratan Tata set sail to the US to study architecture and structural engineering at Cornell University. The years he spent in the US from 1955 to 1962 had a tremendous influence on him. He traveled across America and was even ready to settle down in Los Angeles. But his love affair with America came to an end as Lady Navajbai's health deteriorated and he was forced to return to India. In India, he had a job offer from IBM, but JRD Tata wouldn't allow him to join there and asked him for his resume. That's how Ratan Tata joined Tata Industries in 1962 as an assistant, spending 6 months at the Telco and Tisco plants in Jamshedpur. In 1965, he was appointed technical officer in Tisco's engineering division, and in 1969, he worked as the Tata Group's resident representative in Australia. He returned to India in 1970 to join Tata Consultancy Services for a short stint. His first big job was with Nelco in 1971, where he was made director in charge. In 1974, he joined the board of Tata Sons as a director and rose to become chairman of Tata Industries in 1981. In 1991, as the Indian economy was on the threshold of liberalization, Ratan Tata took over from JRD Tata as chairman of Tata Sons to run the group founded by his great-grandfather more than 100 years ago. He soon started restructuring the Tata Group. The group not only achieved spectacular growth, but it was under his leadership that the Tata Group saw a series of high-profile acquisitions like Tetley, Chorus, Daewoo and Jaguar Land Rover. The billionaire's empire extended from salt to the world's second-largest tea business to giants in steel, software and hotels. He took the Tatas from a $4 billion to a $100 billion group. He was the mascot of the India growth story. A car enthusiast himself, in 2008, Ratan Tata launched the Tata Nano, his dream project of small but super cheap cars which he thought would enable millions of Indians to own their dream car. It came to be known as the People's Car due to its affordable pricing. The project hit a roadblock in West Bengal's Singur and had to shift to Gujarat. In December 2012, he stepped down as chairman of Tata Sons after 50 years with the Tata Group and was appointed chairman emeritus of Tata Sons. A big backer of education and healthcare, Ratan Tata generously funded many philanthropic projects, prominent research institutes and cancer hospitals. After his retirement, not one to sit still, he quietly helped young and bright minds by investing millions in their startups. Ratan Tata's unconditional love for dogs is well known, and he built a pet hospital in Mumbai. He is once said to have missed an invitation from Prince Charles because one of his pet dogs was ill. Even stray dogs were reportedly given free entry at the iconic Taj Mahal Hotel and Bombay House. Ratan Tata was awarded the Padma Vibhushan in 2008, a gentleman to a fault. With Ratan Tata's passing, India has lost one of its shining jewels that glittered for many decades and enriched millions of lives. It's truly the end of an era.
It is truly the end of an era, and we will be speaking to people who got to know him, who were fortunate to know him from very close quarters through the course of this program. I want to first go across to Mr. Praful Patel. He's a member of the Rajya Sabha and former Union Minister for Civil Aviation. Of course, Mr. Ratan Tata was a huge aviation enthusiast. Mr. Patel, thank you very much for speaking with us. We join you and millions of others in condoling the death of one of the legends of Indian industry who's passed away. You worked very closely with him when you were minister. What are your most lasting, most fond memories of Ratan Tata as a person? If you can share some anecdotes, particularly in your time as Civil Aviation Minister, and we all know, how dear Air India was to him. So if you can share some of your fondest memories of Mr. Ratan Tata.
Well, I think it's a very sad day for the country, not only for Indian industry, because Mr. Ratan Tata's life was not just about being an industrialist. He was a statesman, he was a philanthropist, he was into so many different spheres of life which he has influenced in this country. And even for me personally, since I knew him reasonably well, I would say, a personal loss too. But I would also like to, reminisce about some of the few things which I, thought would be interesting to know as of today, since he's no more with us, and I'm sure many people are throwing light on different aspects of his life. But as a minister, I remember, I mean, I knew him much before that. But as a minister, I remember I called him up one day and said, Mr. Tata, I have become the Minister of Civil Aviation, a subject which is very dear to your heart, and it would be very enlightening for me to come and meet you and maybe, have some ideas from you as to what would be the best way forward. So he says, Praful, don't worry about coming to me. I will come to you. I said, no, Mr. Tata, it's not about formality, it's not being a minister or anything. Out of sheer respect, I feel it would be nice to, come and meet you. So he says, oh, you are being very formal, or whatever he tried to, put it in as many words. He says, no, okay, I'll buy you lunch at the Chambers. So we went to have lunch at the Taj Chambers in Mumbai. And then, of course, before the lunch we were sitting, and then we continued our conversation into the lunch. And I asked him, I said, Mr. Tata, what do you feel? He says, listen, this is one sector which is very dear to my heart. I'm a pilot myself. I fly my plane as much as I can. And, Indian aviation really needs to grow, and grow aggressively. It has to be, unburdened from the controls which are there in the government. I said, give me some thoughts. And of course, you did see that most of the actions one took were also, in a way, inspired by Mr. Tata's thoughts in terms of opening up the sector, liberalizing it, allowing more airlines, privatizing of airports, and opening up the skies in general, making even the regulatory hassles and the bureaucratic controls over the entire sector much more flexible and easier.
Okay.
And then I also asked him, I said, Mr. Tata, all this having been said, why don't you start an airline? He says, no, Praful, I've pondered over this idea many a time. I said, I know, Mr. Tata, why you're not wanting to start a new airline. You always wanted Air India, and maybe that's the reason you're waiting and waiting. He says, well, if Air India ever comes my way, we would definitely consider it very, positively. And I said, well, Mr. Tata, let me be very honest. I'm a little new into the ministry, so give me a few months. Let me understand and also share my thoughts with the Prime Minister about if at all Air India needs to be privatized. And willy-nilly, it so happened that a few months into the ministry, we made a presentation to Dr. Manmohan Singh, and I was very convinced that Air India, needed a lot of infusion of capital, also needed a complete refurbishment of its image, the working culture, and it was a tough job to do it within the system of government.
Okay.
So I did make a presentation to the Prime Minister where we thought that it's best that we privatize it, otherwise we'll have to invest so much money, buy so many planes, and then again, the same system is going to be operating all this. And it just so happened that the airport privatization went through, but there was a little reluctance on the part of the government, especially the Congress party, not to privatize Air India.
Okay.
So I went back to Mr. Tata after a few months and I said, Mr. Tata, I tried my best to give you Air India, not you personally as such. Of course, it is a process in government if you had a chance to bid, but this is what's happened. So he laughed and he said, well, now you understand why, I don't want to start an airline. So this is one of the interesting anecdotes. I had a chat with Mr. Tata. Eventually, of course, Air India has gone to them, and I think Air India's future, because of Mr. Tata's initiative, will always be in good hands, thanks to the working culture and the ethos of the Tata Group which he built.
I do want to ask you about this whole Air India saga. As you said, it was very, very close to his heart. He always felt like Air India belonged in the Tata family. And finally, eventually, it's gone back to the Tata family. Of course, it had to happen under the Modi government. It was unsuccessful under the Manmohan Singh government, but eventually it happened when the Modi government was in power. And, did you get a chance to speak to him after the acquisition happened, after Air India went back into the Tata family? Was he thrilled to bits about it? Did he feel like this was an unfinished business, this was an unfinished part of his legacy, and now he can sort of rest well knowing that the crown jewel has come back into the Tata family? Was there any sort of exchange of notes or meetings that you had with him after the acquisition of Air India by the Tata Group?
Well, I think it is, of course, a happy moment. It must have been a very happy moment for him in his life to have had Air India back. And I did speak to him once at some function. Then of course, by the time he had already retired from active business, and he was no more heading Tata Sons, and he had handed over the baton to Mr. Chandrasekaran. But obviously, he was being briefed regularly, and obviously his inputs were being taken very seriously in whatever decision making was taking place. And so at a function when I met him, I said, jokingly, I said, Ratan Seth, how are you feeling now that Air India is with you? And of course, my old experience was as a minister talking to him about Air India. This was much later. So he says, he laughed and he said, Praful, it's something I'm happy about, but there's so much work to do, and I hope my guys are able to, execute it to perfection. So that word perfection stuck in my mind. I said, oh yes, of course, I'm talking to Ratan Tata, and he doesn't want to do anything less than perfection. Of course, it's going to take a while. It's a big job, and Another anecdote and incident I remember is once when I was a minister, he met me and he asked me, he said, Praful, why don't we have rooftop helipads? I said, well, it's interesting. Well, why should we not have them?
Yeah.
You're right. All over the world, in all the big cities of the world, there are rooftop helipads. It's not only necessary for transportation, but also for medical emergencies or even other emergencies. A situation can come. In big cities, traffic can be very, cumbersome, and we should have rooftop helipads. So I said, yes, I agree with you, and I'll get it examined. And well, again, typical in our country, the bureaucratic system, and then I'm sorry to say, but even the security apparatus of our country, puts a lot of question marks. You can't do this for security reasons. Somebody comes in and says this is a defense reason. Then somebody comes and says this is another reason, some technical reason. So whatever it is, but we finally got that policy through, and the first helipad, rooftop helipad which was sanctioned was for Mr. Tata at the Taj Willingdon Mews at Colaba in Mumbai. And trust me, it was approved with all regulatory processes, and he himself flew on the first helicopter. I think he flew it himself and landed at the rooftop of Taj Willingdon Mews, and he called me from there. He says, I have landed here, thank you very much. It was so touching that, and he was excited like a young boy, that who just gets maybe his gift from his parents for doing well or something, like a birthday present. He was so excited. So I think there's lots of things. I think aviation was something very close to his heart and very passionate about it. He loved flying. He loved everything about aviation.
All right, Praful Patel, thank you very much for joining us and sharing those anecdotes about Mr. Ratan Tata. Thank you very much indeed. Let's now go across to someone who has known Ratan Tata in his growing up years. Of course, his father, his late father, Murli Deora, was a very dear friend of Mr. Ratan Tata. Milind Deora is a member of Parliament of the Rajya Sabha, also former Union Minister in the UPA government. Milind, thank you very much for speaking with us. I'm sure you join millions of Indians around the world mourning the passing away of a legend, the passing away of one of the industry titans, but perhaps most importantly for you, the passing away of a fellow South Mumbaiker. As I said a moment ago, I'm sure you would have known him growing up as a child, but I guess his relations with your father, the late Murli Deora, would have been much more like a friendship. What are the fondest memories that you've had of Mr. Tata, both growing up and more importantly, I'm sure you would have had interactions with him as a member of Parliament from South Mumbai, the place where he used to live and you live now, and also in your time as minister, I'm sure you would have had interactions with Mr. Tata. So what were your fondest memories of him?
Well, thank you for having me. I can't claim that I knew him well. I had the opportunity to meet him a few times. My late father certainly knew him well. But as a Mumbaiker, one could feel his presence in the city, in the state. He was a quintessential South Mumbaiker in that sense. He worked and lived in this area. I had the opportunity to represent him several times in Parliament. He made Maharashtra proud nationally. He certainly made India very proud internationally. And we went to the same school as well. We were both products of Cathedral and John Connon School in Colaba, very close to where he worked and lived right till the end of his life. But his legacy is something which I think there's many aspects to his legacy, and there are few people who sometimes transcend being pigeonholed and categorized and put into just one category or one genre. And he was one of those people. I think he was an industrialist, he was also a nationalist, he was also a person who could guide politicians about policy. He was certainly somebody who was a philanthropist and put philanthropy on top of the corporate agenda in India. Was one of the earliest proponents. of that in this country. He was certainly one of the earliest business leaders in this country, business industrial houses, to take a homegrown Indian group international and to dream so big that an Indian group could rise to become a multinational, making bold acquisitions in the automobile space, in the tea space, in many other industries. So I think he left a huge, leaves a huge void, but he certainly lived a very good life, certainly inspired many people, many of his peers, future generations, future entrepreneurs. And one thing I've seen of him is, back in the day when I was a student at Sydenham College, after I passed from Cathedral School, a very close friend of mine helped found ISEC, which is a global student organization. And my very close friend of mine was the founding president of ISEC. And I do remember when Ratan Tata had come to speak to the students at the time, the lasting impression he had on young people, including my very close friend, which lives on till today, almost 30 years later. The impression he left on young people who went to him, were afraid to meet him, but instantly made himself very accessible, gave them all his attention, invited suggestions, however out of the box they may be, and told people to dream big, think big. So these kind of people, I think, are the leaders who know how to invest in people. They know how to make people feel better about themselves than they were feeling before they met that person. And they're people who live the lives the way they want to live their life. I mean, there are business leaders who feel, they've made money, they want to do something with their wealth, they want to donate to charity, they want to have a more extroverted public lifestyle. There are others who want to live very introvertedly. And Ratan Tata was one of those who you'd see taking his dog out for a walk in Kolaba in South Mumbai. So he also taught people like me that, do what you want and what makes you happy. And I think he lived a really good life because he adhered to those principles.
I do want to ask you about something that you mentioned about his connect with young people, and much after he retired, he was also an early investor in some of India's biggest startups. The ability to connect with a young person, howsoever wacko his ideas or her ideas were, and yet to be patient with them, to understand where they're coming from, and to have the foresight and the ability to buy those ideas and buy into those ideas. How did he manage to do that? Because he was the great Ratan Tata. I mean, he was the legend. He didn't have to sort of bring himself down to the level of a 23-year-old or a 25-year-old and understand where they were coming from and believe in what they were trying to build. Tell us a little bit more about that connect with young people that he had, which of course led him to be a founder, investor in numerous successful startups here in India.
I'll tell you one story. When I had just been elected to Parliament at the age of 27 in 2004, I was at the Taj Mahal Hotel in Mumbai in Kolaba for a function. And he was entering while I was leaving. And he basically, my father and I were together, and he met me. He met my father and he said, "Hi Murli, how are you?" They chatted for a bit. And then he came to me and he says, "I have to tell you, I'm a bigger fan of yours than I am of your father's. And I heard you speak on a television interview, and I was very impressed by your ideas for Mumbai and for urban issues." So, that caught me off guard, for instance, that here's a man who we look up to, a very, very senior corporate leader, somebody who has a vision not just for what his business should be doing, but also for the city that he and I both live in, for the region that we live in. So I think these are things which, good leaders do. They naturally engage with people. They don't discriminate on the fact that you may be young, you may be old, you may be a man, you may be a woman, you may be of one economic strata, you may be of another economic strata. They look at good ideas. They're not driven necessarily by and bogged down and being dogmatic because of ideologies, but they're more into ideas and people. And I respect leaders like that. I respect people who have the ability to transcend these categorizations and society pigeonholing you into, you have to only do this or you only have to do that, and you can't do this if you're a corporate leader and you can't do this if you're a politician. And just being free, going with the flow. And I found him to be one of those people. There are many other business leaders like that who I know who have that rare quality. And he certainly was one of those who was very at ease with himself. He was at ease at not being seen at parties, at being seen at weddings, at being seen at functions, but yet having a lasting impact. And I know that when people would meet him one-on-one on an issue that could be related to his business, that could be related to something else, they would walk away fully engaged and very happy with their engagement. Either they received some really good advice from him, or they walked away feeling that he took away some good advice from them. And this was young people, this was older people, this were experienced people. Now that's a rare trait, and I think people who do that Zaka, in my opinion, and I've seen this with musicians even, who I admire, these are typically people who have no insecurity. They're not insecure about welcoming feedback, having an honest conversation. There's no protocol between them and the person they're talking to, and that's refreshing. So he was one of those leaders, and I know that many people who met him and interacted with him walked away with that impression.
And finally, again, something that you referred to previously, much before terms like corporate social responsibility and corporate philanthropy became big. I mean, he went out there and was already practicing those philosophies, even things like sustainability and caring for the environment. This is something that we rarely see, or at least used to see 30 years ago. We see it now, corporates are talking about it, but something that corporates did not talk about 30 years ago. So he had the vision to understand that, look, it's not just about making money or making profits, but if you solve the society's problems, it somehow will help your business as well.
Yeah. No, there's no doubt that he was way ahead of his time in corporate India in terms of, demonstrating that what is good for society, what is good for the environment, what is good for the country can be good for business. He was a trendsetter in that sense. There's absolutely no doubt about it. He was also a trendsetter in that he was under his leadership, Tata was one of the first groups that went out, first Indian groups, business houses that went out and truly became a multinational, and encouraged Indian businesses to go out, dream big, acquire assets overseas, and honestly, assets which are not easily manageable assets. I mean, acquiring Land Rover, acquiring Jaguar, a B2C business in the consumer space in a very, very competitive market. These brands compete in a luxury segment in the Western markets. Managing it from India, operating and owning it from India, going and buying Tetley tea. So he demonstrated that India has the power to do that. Chorus Steel. And I think he also, so while he at one level brought about a certain philanthropic angle into corporate India and brought that culture into the corporate India, he certainly at the same time demonstrated that we as a country and we as a fraternity should dream big and go out and acquire assets overseas and not just limit our scope to India. But we can actually compete with the best companies globally.
All right, Milind, thank you so much for joining us with your thoughts, your anecdotes, your stories about Mr. Ratan Tata. And like I said, we join you and millions of others around the country condoling the passing away of truly a corporate icon, a legend in Indian industry. But let's try and get to know the person that Mr. Tata was, somebody who's worked very, very closely with him as executive assistant and ethics officer in the Tata Group, who's worked with Mr. Ratan Tata personally and professionally for a number of years, is Mr. Mukunji Rajan. He's the author of My Life with the Tatas, very close aide of Mr. Ratan Tata. Thank you very much. Like I said, you've worked with Mr. Ratan Tata for a very, very long time. You've said this in your book as well, that one word that you would use to describe Mr. Tata is ambition. Talk to us about his ambition at a time when India was just opening up and Indian companies were dealing with this sort of uncharted terrain, uncharted waters as it were. He had the dream, the tenacity, the ambition, the vision to say that Indian companies can compete on the global stage. Where did that come from?
So I think the thing to first bear in mind is he was taking charge of the Tata Group from his predecessor JRD Tata, who was quite a legend in the Indian business community. JRD had been chairman for 53 years. However, much of that period had been a period when India was still a relatively protected economy. and just emerging after Indian independence, quite a poor country. So GRD had a separate set of challenges, but had proven how to really lead this group in fairly constrained environment. For Ratan Tata, the challenge is completely different because the economy is opening up, foreign multinationals are coming into the country, and Indian businesses, no longer constrained by the license Raj, were now obviously also presenting competitive challenges to the Tatas. So he had almost a double whammy. He had to prove to people that he was a worthy successor to GRD Tata and could really lead the Tata Group to further success. But he also had to handle this new wave of competition. So I think the first thing that he figured he had to do was really to ensure that the Tatas could protect their home turf. And a lot of what he did in the 1990s was really about consolidation and defending the home market. Without the home market, there's no question of being able to compete overseas. And to do that, he really focused on several things. One was a very important focus on quality management and control. In fact, to honor the memory of his predecessor who passed away in 1993, he instituted what he called the GRD Quality Value Award Program to ensure that Tata companies created best practices, benchmarked themselves with peers not just in India but around the world, and shared those best practices with each other. Once he was able to do that and got more confidence that really Tata companies were on their path to improving their product quality, to being able to compete well, that's when he started getting the confidence that perhaps these companies could also go overseas and fight with foreign competitors in their home markets. Again, to do that, you needed financial resources, you needed a strong brand, you needed the power of the Tata Group, the whole having to be greater than the sum of the parts. And towards that end, through the 90s, he ensured that the Tata Group became a much more unified figure. The famous Tata brand and logo that is still current today was something that he devised. Before he came on the scene, each Tata company was literally using its own interpretation of the Tata brand and the logo. So a lot that he did to focus on quality, to unify the group, to ensure that there was much greater financial muscle put behind key initiatives in the 1990s, I think eventually paid off in the 2000s.
I do want to ask you though, he did make some mistakes professionally. I mean, the Chorus acquisition, for example, you've written in your book what a bleeder that was. Really, by way of investment, it was too much. Then the global financial crisis struck, so that was a bad call. And even in his later years, this whole succession battle that happened with Cyrus Mistry and how it became ugly. What I do want to know from you though was how he dealt with these challenges. How did he deal with those situations where he made mistakes? Of course, he realized it, and then how did he go about acknowledging and correcting those mistakes?
I think he was certainly not somebody who was given to sort of fooling himself. He understood the pressures that were created by some of his own actions, which he took full responsibility for. I think Chorus Steel and the kind of debt that it piled on to Tata Steel and indirectly onto the Tata Holding Company was to some extent bad luck. In 2008, a year after the acquisition had taken place, you had the global financial crisis. And frankly, nobody around the world, let alone in India, had a clue or inkling that something like this was going to happen. And this really, I think, set back some of the group enterprises for several years and eventually led to some of the divestments of assets that had been picked up in the early 2000s, subsequent to Mr. Tata's chairmanship. But business goes through cycles. Sometimes you make the wrong calls. He was not somebody who was defensive about what he had done. And on the whole, I think if you take a look at his tenure, the kind of ambition that he injected in his Tata peers down the ranks, I think has really paid off. And if Tatas are today where they are, multi-$100 billion market cap group with multiple flagship companies doing really well, I think it is in no small measure due to the kind of ambition he injected. And that would not have been possible if the group had not really made an effort to make things work and had pursued ambitions, goals that perhaps may at that time have seemed almost foolhardy.
All right, Mr. Mukund Rajan, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and anecdotes and memories about Mr. Ratan Tata. Thank you very much indeed.